Taiwan and China team up to search for missing fishers near Kinmen. Caught between two sides, we meet the Chinese and Taiwanese working either side of the strait. Taiwan's made changes to prevent deadly factory fires, but is it enough? Plus, you've heard of beef and rice, but have you tried beef inside your rice? Good evening, you're watching Taiwan Plus News with me, Leslie Liao. We begin with the latest on joint search and rescue missions taking place off the Chinese coast. In a rare sight of unity, the Taiwan and China Coast Guards have joined forces to search for survivors of two separate incidents, one near the islands of Matsu and one near the islands of Kinmen. A total of 3 people still remain unaccounted for. Rick Glowert has been following developments for us from Taipei.
So joint search and rescue operations between China and Taiwan Coast Guard in both the Kinmen and Matsu Islands. That's 2 sets of islands belonging to Taiwan, but close to the Chinese coast. I spoke to the Taiwanese Coast Guard earlier today. He said it's not that unlikely that these sort of accidents happen in this area, especially at this time of year in the spring when the weather is bad, and that of course China and Taiwan cooperate when it comes to saving lives at sea. But what is interesting is the timing. These 2 search and rescue operations come just a month after a serious incident in Kinmen. That is when a Taiwanese Coast Guard vessel chased a Chinese boat out of Taiwan's territorial waters. The Chinese boat capsized and 2 Chinese nationals died. Now, Beijing has reacted very angrily to this. It said that it would be enforcing its own maritime law in Taiwan's waters and upped its patrols there. Everyone was worried that this would escalate. Now, the joint operations we've seen in the last couple of days look like the opposite of that. In fact, Taiwan has said that Beijing has been sticking to protocol and stayed out of Taiwan's waters. So perhaps after a tense few weeks across the strait, calm waters may be ahead.
Since Rick's report, the Fujian Coast Guard has deployed a fleet of ships to increase patrols in waters around Kinmen, with China's Taiwan Affairs Office saying Taiwan's ruling DPP has shown no remorse over the death of 2 Chinese fishers last month. The Taiwanese islands of Kinmen, just kilometers from China, have become the focus of global attention as a flashpoint for a possible conflict. But underneath the headlines, Kinmen and the nearby Chinese city of Xiamen have long had a close relationship. Ed Moon reports on the Taiwanese and Chinese trying to make their lives across the strait despite the threat of war.
Prepping for another busy day of service. Wu Haoyue makes classic Taiwanese dishes like braised pork rice and pork cutlets. These are everyday staples for millions of Taiwanese. But they're not ordinary fare for Wu's customers here, in the Chinese city of Xiamen.
他们其实也是蛮喜欢台湾料理的，就是很多去过台湾的人都会到我的店里。
Wu moved to Xiamen in 2017, one of thousands of Taiwanese to make the cross-strait journey when ties between China and Taiwan were less strained, despite Beijing's long-standing claims of sovereignty over its island neighbor. With a population of more than 5 million people, Xiamen is a stark contrast from Taiwan's sleepy, outlying Kinmen Islands, which are visible from its coast. Most Taiwanese originally came from this region of China, and its geographical closeness has for years been a rare source of cross-strait friendship. A short ferry ride between the two allowed thousands of people to forge ties, build businesses, and start families. Among them is Xiamen native Chen Mei. She married a Taiwanese man and moved across the strait to Kinmen in 2005. Like Wu, she also started her own business, this time selling traditional Chinese culture to Taiwanese as period costumes.
很多学生都很喜欢，因为除了对文化的那种可能想要了解啊，可能电视剧的影响啊。
When Chen started her business, she didn't anticipate many of the challenges she'd face: the COVID pandemic and worsening ties between Taipei and Beijing. There's been no Chinese tourists in Kinmen since 2019, once one of Chen's main sources of income.
很可惜，陆客不能过来。如果今天陆客过来，当然也是我们的一块市场。
While across the water, Wu has faced questions from curious customers wondering how Taiwanese people really feel about their relationship with China.
他如果发现你是台湾人，就会聊有关政治的，所以这个其实我比较少聊这些啦，就是会稍微避开这个话题这样。
But politics is hard to avoid here, where despite the similarities, the differences between China and Taiwan are so clear. Relations reached a fresh low here after a recent clash involving Taiwan's Coast Guard left 2 Chinese fishers dead. But just weeks later, both sides worked together to rescue the crew of another capsized vessel. For people here, it's part of the ebb and flow of life on the front line between the 2 sides, and they remain hopeful that in the end, Beijing and Taipei can follow their choice for peaceful coexistence. Karma Xu, Simonetta Ho, and Ed Moon in Kinmen for Taiwan Plus.
To find out more about what life is like for Taiwanese working in China, Ed Moon spoke to Mo, who has started her own business and is based in Xiamen.
Can you tell us a little bit why you decided to move to China for work?
我是刚好17年的时候有在学校大学的时间，然后经历了到对岸就到内地这边，然后去实习。然后就觉得其实大陆这边的市场是很大的，然后我也想要多走走看看，跟不同的人事物合作，所以才会在毕业的时候就过来这边。
And have you run into lots of other Taiwanese working in China and especially in Xiamen?
厦门来说，会有很多的台湾协会，然后或者是各个不一样、不同基地的台办圈子，或是台湾青年创业就业的基地，然后确实是有很多都是有扎堆有圈子的，他们可能会一起打篮球，一起唱歌，一起交际，一起烤肉，还有各种不同的活动等等的人。但我个人是没有，因为我其实很喜欢认识不同圈子的人，然后不同圈子甚至不同城市不同地方的人，所以不会局限于说在跟台湾人做相处。
We often see Beijing promoting these different benefits for Taiwanese who choose to move to China for work and to start businesses. Do you think that they're attractive and a good reason for Taiwanese to move to China?
虽然说台湾会看到很多大陆这边说会有补贴，会有很多的政策上面的辅助，但其实这个都是有它一些比较深的层面。因为你如果说开个公司，你肯定要有很多的相应的成本，然后你要去做什么，然后你能不能在大陆这边适应这个环境，其实它有很多不确定的因素，所以我个人是站在不支持的。对，就除非说你其实是个爸爸妈妈有来过大陆做生意，或者是你其实有来过，然后你对这边是很感兴趣的，而且你愿意承担这个风险，你有这个抗压性，你有这个能力的话，那我觉得你可以考虑一下。
That was Ed Moon speaking with Taiwanese entrepreneur Mo, who is in Xiamen, China. A Taipei City councilor is being investigated for alleged corruption. Chen Congwen of the KMT is accused of pressuring the Taipei City Police Department to purchase surveillance cameras from a company he has connections to. 8 other people, including workers from the camera manufacturer, have also been questioned. Prosecutors want to hold Chen incommunicado, but he says the case is politically motivated.
监督检察局太认真，被报复，司法迫害，政治追杀。
Taiwan's Supreme Court has overturned a guilty verdict for an indigenous man who hunted protected animals. Tamatalum is a member of Taiwan's indigenous Bunum tribe. In 2013, he hunted protected species for his sick mother to make traditional indigenous food. Talum killed the animals without permission using an illegal homemade firearm. He was sentenced to 3.5 years behind bars. In 2021, President Tsai Ing-wen pardoned Talum out of respect for indigenous traditions, but the pardon did not acquit him of the ruling, only the punishment. The court's ruling now clears his record. The cabinet wants to improve safety in Taiwan's factories after a fatal factory fire last year. But as John Van Trist reports, not everyone is convinced the steps it's taking will change much.
Nearly 6 months on, the burnt ruins of this southern Taiwan factory are still not cleared away. When it caught fire in September, it had 30 times the legal limit of flammable chemicals in storage. The result was a fierce blaze that killed 10 people and left over 100 injured. Firefighters are still outraged over the incident, which killed 4 of their comrades. Now, the government is trying to make sure this sort of fire, made so destructive by undeclared chemicals, won't happen again. The cabinet has approved an amendment to the Factory Management Act that will raise fines on factories that don't declare dangerous materials or falsify their declarations. The maximum fine will go up 100 times to $150,000. Already, some local officials, including those in the southern Taiwan county where last year's fire happened, are optimistic.
从环境部的化学域开始去勾稽危险的化学物质到哪些工厂去勾稽以后，它会产出一个疑似的危险的名单，通报给各主管机关。
But some firefighters are skeptical. Though the maximum fine has gone up, they say that's hardly a big deal for a company like the factory's owner, Launch Technologies, which in the first half of 2023, before the fire, made around $10 million.
真的要保障我们的话，第一是我们认为罚款应该要以每个公司的营业额要有一个集聚，就是营业额达到多少是这样的罚款，然后再达到多少，再往上再超过多少，再往上一个集聚。我们认为营业额就是罚款应该有一个集聚的标准，然后再来就是说，我们认为应该也要有刑责，因为没有刑责，其实业者他们都会想要钻漏洞。
Fire safety consultant Lin Jinhong does think the higher fine will help, but he says many factory owners don't actually know that some of the materials they store can be hazardous. And he says it will take more than fines to stop Taiwan's frequent factory fires from turning deadly.
就算他申报，他还是有可能会发生危害啊！因为他一开始就冒烟嘛，所以他会有很多问题要一起去考虑。比方说你的储存场所，然后呢，你一开始的应变的这些程序，所以呢，他绝对不是单纯申报就可以解决所有的问题。
It's safety culture, he says, that needs an overhaul. And until that changes, even the best laws can only do so much. Delphine Chen and John Van Trieste for Taiwan Plus.
The Marshall Islands Embassy in Taiwan is commemorating their country's victims of American nuclear weapons testing. As Wesley Lewis reports, it's bringing awareness to the dangers of nuclear weapons and strengthening ties between Taiwan and the Marshall Islands.
A Micronesian melody to remember home. These Marshallese students in Taipei are honoring the often forgotten victims of U.S. atomic testing in the Pacific almost 80 years ago. Still dealing with the consequences, the Marshall Islands want to raise awareness of the dangers posed by nuclear energy.
Every Marshallese, every single one of the students here, has relatives who have suffered from the illnesses related to the nuclear testing, myself included.
Then administered by the United States, the Marshall Islands were used as a testing ground for nuclear weapons after World War II. Hundreds of residents were forcibly relocated, and 67 atomic bombs were detonated over a 12-year period. It affected people's health and their surroundings. Making things worse, storm surges are becoming more frequent, and with sea levels rising due to climate change, a concrete dome left by the U.S. that contains radioactive debris threatens to leak into the environment. There are still over 40,000 people living in the Marshall Islands. This event not only commemorates, but also aims to stress the continuing effects of those weapons tests on Marshallese people. And as one of Taiwan's last 12 remaining diplomatic allies, the Pacific Island nation feels that its concerns about nuclear safety resonate strongly here. Among Taiwanese, nuclear energy is a controversial topic, with concerns over its safety ignited by the Fukushima power plant disaster. These Marshallese students believe the lessons from their country's experience might sway debate here.
Not many people know the history, and I think it's very important to know what has happened before so we don't make the same mistakes now.
It's important for us to share this history, whether it would be with our community or communities abroad.
Every year, no matter how far from home they might be, the people of the Marshalls mark how their islands were damaged by atomic testing. By continuing to tell their story, they hope to see an end to the world's nuclearization. Eason Chen and Wesley Lewis for Taiwan Plus.
Coming up, the Taiwanese tomatoes lasting longer on the shelf thanks to some clever technology. Stay tuned.
Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Ian Kavat. Today we examine China's engagement with Africa.
So, unfortunately, this very aggressive form of cultural revolution-like politics in China seems to be moving forward in this modern era.
This grave injustice is happening. The issue is, what can the U.S. do to help strengthen Taiwan?
We need that kind of mindset to prepare for the warfare.
What implications does this have on Taiwan and the region as a whole?
Just like Ukraine right now, you need people to understand we're doing this for our own country.
Reaffirmed our support for the Taiwanese ability to make their own decisions about their own future.
It's very hard to duplicate in the short time. Taiwan still can continue being the leading position if we put efforts on R&D.
And you are riding on a wave. This is exactly the time you need to double down.
Or I did not realize I am actually running to be the first Asian woman in the state senate. Our next generation, they can see Asian American is as equal and have the same platform.
Taiwan Talks provides a platform for the voices and perspectives that are shaping our country.
For more stories from here in Taiwan and around the world, visit us on social media or follow our website at TaiwanPlus.com.
We bring you stories from Taiwan
every day of the week.
Our reporters travel the nation.
Exploring the issues that matter to you.
News from here in Taiwan and around the world.
What's up, Taiwan? On Taiwan Plus.
Welcome back. This is Taiwan Plus News. Tomato lovers in Taiwan can soon keep their favorite produce fresh for up to a year. A tech firm has come up with a method to preserve beef tomatoes way beyond their natural shelf life. Joyce Tseng has this story.
Plump, juicy tomatoes are staying fresh for longer with the help of technology. Taiwan's largest beef tomato supplier has developed a way to extend the shelf life of their produce from about 15 days to 1 whole year.
寒天的时阵吼，咱透过冷链这个技术吼，来甲保存好，他们就会当延长到1年以上，甚至会当来出口去世界各国。
The global frozen food market is valued at about $265 billion, and demand is rising, as it is a popular alternative to fresh and canned products to save money and cut down on food waste. As Taiwan develops its own flash freezing technology, which freezes the fruit so quickly ice crystals don't get a chance to form inside, the country is hoping to get in on the global market, starting with tomatoes.
这个调节整个番茄的供应的这个系统，那供应呢量多的时候，我们就把它做一些处理，处理之后这是熊条，只要有个冷链的设备。
Consumers in Taiwan are set to reap the most immediate benefits, having more stable supplies and prices of beef tomatoes year-round. A precedent farmers hope to extend to other fresh goods soon too. Andy Xue and Joyce Chen for Taiwan Plus.
U.S. officials say they knew about Nauru's decision to switch recognition from Taiwan to China ahead of time, but were unable to stop it. The information was revealed during a U.S. Senate hearing on the Pacific. Nauru switched relations to Beijing from Taipei just after Taiwan's presidential election in January. Taiwan now has 3 remaining diplomatic allies in the Pacific: Tuvalu, Palau, and the Marshall Islands. To find out more, Harrell Hughes spoke to Mihai Sora, a former Australian diplomat and a research fellow at the Lowy Institute in Sydney, Australia.
How important are the Pacific Islands to both China and the US?
It's the geography that's the key right now, particularly for the United States. So in different ways, various regions, various territories around the Pacific are key strategic, potential strategic strongholds in a context of increasing geopolitical competition and increasing possibility of a kinetic event between larger powers.
Now we're switched relations from Taipei to Beijing immediately after Taiwan's elections, which the US now says that they knew about and they failed to stop. So now the US is focused on Taiwan's 3 remaining allies in the Pacific to make sure that their needs are met. What realistically can the US offer these countries that China cannot?
There's a lot of potential offerings that a country like the United States could make for Pacific countries. With respect to news of an imminent switch, there's very little that an external actor can do, even a country as large as the US. Climate change is the number one national security priority for most Pacific Island countries, and the other is economic connectivity.
China is the largest trading partner in the Pacific region, so if these countries do not switch to Beijing, will they face retaliation? Will they miss out on these partnerships?
I think we've seen plenty of evidence that China likes to use both a carrot and a stick. So the carrot being either existing trade relationships, where China is the main customer for many of the resources that come out of the Pacific, or the stick approach, where we saw in recent years China weaponizing the tourism sector in Palau as a way to punish them, essentially, for not switching recognitions.
These Pacific Islands are very small, very isolated, and don't have a lot of geopolitical power. But now they have China and the US, these 2 superpowers, essentially fighting over them. Can they use this to their advantage?
Absolutely. Look, the key resource for some of these Pacific countries, particularly the smallest ones, is their own sovereignty. But that sovereignty is increasingly valuable in the context of great power competition. So yes, Pacific countries can leverage that and essentially change the dynamics between themselves and larger countries. They can put themselves on a more equal playing field, and they can ask for things out of that relationship that may not previously have been considered, whether it's to do with security or economic development or other forms of assistance.
That was Mihai Sora from the Lowy Institute in Sydney, Australia, speaking to our reporter Harrell Hughes. A Reuters report says former U.S. President Donald Trump authorized the CIA to launch a covert campaign against the Chinese government. 3 former officials told the news agency that U.S. intelligence used fake internet identities to spread negative narratives on Chinese social media. They said the goal was to turn public opinion in the country against President Xi Jinping's government. The effort began in 2019, 2 years into Trump's time in office. Australia says it will resume funding to the primary UN relief agency operating in Gaza. Australia's Foreign Minister Penny Wong announced plans to resume funding to the UN aid agency for Palestinians on Friday. Her country joined others in pausing funding for 2 months after allegations that agency workers participated in the October 7th Hamas attacks on Israel arose. The UN body that heads the fund says it fired some of its staff after Israel provided details on the allegations. A court ruling in Sapporo has brought Japan one step closer to marriage equality. The High Court in the northern city ruled that Japan's ban on same-sex marriage is unconstitutional because it violates the fundamental rights to equality. It follows a similar ruling in a Tokyo district court earlier this week. The decisions could pave the way for Japan's parliament to codify a same-sex marriage law. Polls show around 70% of Japanese support such unions.
本当に望んでた待ちに待った違憲判決が出て今すっごく嬉しい気持ちです。これまで多くの方がこの訴訟に協力してくださったおかげで出た判決だとも思っております。
Scientists in South Korea have developed a new kind of meat product hidden in plain sight. Chris Gorin has the story.
Rice, a main staple and comfort food to much of the world. But there's more to this than meets the eye. Inside each and every grain is beef. But no animals were harmed in the making of the dish. This is part of the rapidly expanding field of cultivated meat, grown in labs, not farms. Scientists at South Korea's Yonsei University treat the rice with enzymes to create an optimal environment for infusing and growing meat cells, creating a hybrid plant-animal product without slaughtering any animals.
저희가 지금 만든 딱 요 쌀의 경우에 그냥 쌀에 비해서 한 8% 정도 많은 단백질과 7% 정도 많은 지방을 함유하고 있습니다. 근데 이제 그 단백질 안에서도 약 18% 정도가 어떤 동물성 단백질로 확인이 되었습니다.
Cultivated meat not only has the potential to reduce ethical concerns around meat production, but environmental ones as well. Multiple studies show that greenhouse gas emissions from meat production are nearly double that from plant-based agriculture. And the vast share of these emissions come from raising cows for beef and dairy, due in part to practices such as deforestation to make room for grazing land. But are people willing to eat lab-grown meat rice? Customers who have tried the rice at this restaurant in Seoul are giving mixed reviews.
I'm actually a huge fan of it, to be honest.
기발하신 것 같은데 제 생각에는 소고기의 뭐 육즙이나 식감 같은 거를 따라올 수는 없을 것 같아요.
Cultivated meat is still in its early stages of development. But as scientists refine the process and aim to match the nutritional value of animal products, they hope that eventually more consumers may be willing to join the herd. James Lin and Chris Gorin for Taiwan Plus.
Thank you for watching Taiwan Plus News. Before we go, take a minute to enjoy this footage of green sea turtles just off the Galapagos Islands. Activists are calling for greater protections for the region. I'm Leslie Liao. Take care, and I'll see you next time.